I don't think I'm cruel in a poem, but I'm honest in a poem. And sometimes I think it's necessary. Nice to be with people who care about poetry and talking about poetry and not other ugly things that are going on in the world right now.
Do you feel like people don't care about poetry?
I think some people don't care about poetry, and that makes me sad.
Why do you think that is?
I think that there are people who don't know what it is, and I think some of those folks are politicians. I hate to go there, but I do think that some people really don't understand what it is and how life affirming it is.
When you say life affirm, it's a big statement. What do you think about poetry makes it life?
I think it is very much a life affirming tool. It's been in my life, well, ever since I was 6 years old. So, and I knew it was going to stay in my life from age 6 on. And everything good in my life has somehow been connected to poetry. So I can say that and really genuinely mean it.
I feel like a lot of people when they're kids and they have that experience with poetry, they're like, "Oh, I've been doing this since elementary school." Like, there's usually a person that's involved. Do you have a person that's makes that statement especially true?
Yes, I'm pretty ready to cry. Oh, shame on me. Anyway, no, my father gave me a book, A Child's Garden of Verses, when I was 6. And it was a childish version of it. It had a claymation 3D image on the front, so it was very inviting for a 6-year-old, and I was hooked. But both of my parents really instilled a love of reading. My mother read to me more, but my dad really instilled the love of reading as well, but he's the one who gave me Child's Garden first.
Have you ever given that book to someone else?
Yes. I have my nieces and nephews and godchildren and students, anybody that I could.
You stay around that.
Yeah, I've purchased it so many times in many versions, yes.
I think you mentioned a couple forms. So you mentioned that your mom read to you. You mentioned your dad. The poetry you mentioned claymation even. And then today in your set, you have a lot of ekphrastic kind of based work and things like that. When you're writing a ekphrasis, what do you think is the key to consider?
Well, Francis is writing in response to art, and for me, I love a variety of art forms, but especially in the last few years, I have really immersed myself into the art form of photography. So I love to take pictures as well. So I know that the photographer Robert Frank, who was a what I would call a beat photographer, he was very much immersed in the beat scene, and Jack Kerouac wrote the introduction to the book that made him famous, The Americans. Um, he says, and if you're going to create a photograph, make sure that the essence of humanity is in at each and every photograph that you take. And so I really do think about that every time I take a picture. There has to be a slice of humanity, and the beat poets think about that as well. And I think all poets think about that. Any writer or any artist thinks about that. There's an essence of humanity, and how can I touch someone? Even if you're writing about yourself, somehow there's a universal quality to what you're writing. There's always a connection. Even if I believe, even if you try not to connect, you're going to connect. Sometimes you connect more, even if you try not to connect.
Is that push for universality what separates beat poetry from other types of poetry?
I've not necessarily. I think the original beats, I think one of the things that separated them from other writers was when the original beats came in, like in the 40s and into the 50s, 40s to 60s. Unfortunately, there was sort of this romanticism with self-destruction, and that was an issue. Now, beat poets today, there really is a veering against that, which is good. And like the National Beat Poetry Foundation, which is in Connecticut, they're really they've got an emphasis against that and promoting literacy and gender rights and really focusing on women as well. And so that's really a little bit different in some ways than what was going on back at that time. But also there were people that wanted to really adhere to some of the traditional forms, and they were having a hard time with change with the original beats. But at the same time, one of the wonderful things with the original beats and what folks in the new beat generation are still trying to keep today is that they want everybody to be accepted, and they want everyone to have his and her and their own voice. And that's one thing that remains true, whether you see yourself as an original beat or a new beat. If that I hope that answers your
Yes,
question.
it does. Why the need to stick with the old identity then instead of be like, we're not even Beat Saber, we're just new name.
Why the new name?
Why isn't there a new name? Why do we still say, oh, Beat Poet 2025 versus Beat?
Well, we want to preserve the history of the original beats because there's some wonderful work there. And there's certainly some wonderful female poets from the original beat generation too, and we don't want to forget them. Elise Cowan, for instance, is one of the lesser known beats from the original beat generation. She committed suicide when she was only 27 years old, and her family wanted to just completely pretend she wasn't even there. They wanted to burn everything. If it weren't for a couple of her friends who kept some of her work, we wouldn't even know about her at all. So we want to preserve what we do know about. And Allen Ginsberg and how, it's part of the canon. So we still want to preserve some of this rich work, but we don't want to romanticize some of the destructive stuff. And we just want to learn from that and build on that, I think.
One of your poems used a lot of repetition. It seemed like it was a litany, although I didn't see the form. It was the one that was asking like ask, 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 and then you inverted it with like the don't ask, don't ask, don't
Oh, hmm.
phrase. Do you find it hard to write poems with that sort of structure?
I can't say I find it hard. I don't always use that. That is something that just kind of came out of me. I think it was supposed to happen. That wasn't a process that came. I was on the floor of my parents' house looking up, to be completely honest, at the sleeves of my mother's blouses, and I just believe it was something inside me that came. And it just was this repetition. I think it was sort of this primal thing that happened. It just happened.
I do want to make sure we have time for questions from people. A couple final questions for me. You mentioned having a signature poem. Well, that's cool. No?
I'm happy to at least know that there are people that like one of them anyway, that they wanna keep asking about it, yeah.
How does that make you feel to like do a lot of shows and people keep requesting the same poem over and over again?
It's it is the most requested. There's only one other poem that has been requested a few times, and that is one that I would rather not be requested, so I'm happy that this one's requested. Yeah, and, it's really it tickles me because I'm always shocked if anybody reads anything of mine, and actually, probably the biggest compliment to me was somebody approached me about my book, Meat and Bone, and said that it helped them. That was the biggest compliment I could ever receive. That was what I hoped I would achieve by writing that book. I was just floored, I beaming, so that's I think the greatest thing I feel a poet can ever achieve is to hopefully somebody will be helped by our work.
You do a lot of books.
No, I have 3 books and one is on the way. I've been birthing it. I've been in labor for, you know, I'm like, I don't know how many weeks late on this one, but yeah, it's just waiting for it to be printed. So 4th book is coming. That's it.
Why make books?
Um, it just feels very cathartic and this 4th book, I was hoping that my father would be alive to have it in his hands, but at least he knew that it was going to come, and as silly as it sounds, it's gonna be a hardback book, and that was very important to him, that it was gonna be a hardback book. Aesthetically, knowing it was gonna be hardback, something about that just mattered to him so much, so I am happy to know that he passed away knowing this thing was gonna be hardback, and it was gonna be primarily about him, so, yeah.
Why did you say it's silly that it's hard?
I'm sorry?
Why did you say it's silly that it's hardback?
Well, it's not I mean, it seems like such I don't know. A book is a book. A book is wonderful no matter what. So, um, that was such a primary thing that I was trying to achieve. I mean, I was ready to sell my soul and other things just to get a hardback book for my father. So that's how important it was. Um, so I'm I guess I'm being facetious, but it was that important to my father and all these his old fart buddies. They wanted a hardback book, so
I guess on the other, why aren't more poetry books hardback?
I think it really comes down to the expense. It's very expensive to do that. But I mean, certainly, for durability's sake, it would be wonderful if we could all have hardback books, just because it would last longer. It would be great.
How difficult was that discussion with your publisher to be like, this is hardback?
Well, this particular publisher only creates hardback books, so that was very lucky.
Sandy, one of the things I love about your work is you write a lot of poetic narrative based on your own life. Could you talk a little bit about how you negotiate what to include and what not to include in these narratives?
It became easier as years went on because when my parents were alive, they basically decided they were no longer going to come to my readings because it was too hard for them to hear a lot of these things unless I would say to them, Mom and Dad, I'm going to be reading only things that will be comfortable for you. And sometimes I will determine what I'm reading based on who's in the audience because I don't know why I am that raw in my writing, but I really am generally very autobiographical. So I I I usually don't hold back. I don't know why because my mother always said to me, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. And I tried to adhere to that in conversation, but not in poetry, I guess. It's not, I don't know. That's, part of me thinks that's awful. I mean, I don't think I'm cruel in a poem, but I'm honest in a poem. And sometimes I think it's necessary. If I think it's going to be hurtful, and then I won't try to publish it, or I won't, maybe some of it I'll just keep it private. But does that answer your question? But I'm raw usually. Mm, I guess I just need that. It's part of my healing, I guess.
Sandra, along with your photography and in your poetry, do you write poetry to the photo or pick photo to the poetry? Well, that's a good.
That is a great question. Primarily, I have written poetry in response to the photo, but I've been trying to go the other way lately. I've been trying to kind of do opposite. And something that I would like to try to work on now is to do some script writing and in response to paintings, and really kind of go wild.